Hello, and welcome to my YouTube channel, Reading Little Blue Books Out Loud While Stoned. Today we're going to do part 4 and the final part of Little Blue Book number 66, titled Crimes of the Borgias, written by Alexander Dumas, edited by H.M Tichenor. And if you've been following along, the Borgias were some really prick people, for crying out loud. They loved to poison and murder people. The Pope and his son. Crazy. Alright. Here we go, part 4. Pardon me. As soon as he was placed in bed, the Pope was taken with a severe fever, which did not give way to emetics of bleeding. Almost immediately it became necessary to administer the last sacraments of the Church. A saving grace, by the way, that the many victims of the Borgias did not enjoy. However, the Pope's strong constitution, which had defied old age, enabled him to fight 8 days with death. At last, after these days of mortal agony, he died, without once uttering the name of Caesar or Lucretia, who were the two pools around which he had turned all his ambitions and all his crimes. His age was 72. And he had reigned 11 years. Caesar Borgia, perhaps because he had taken less of the fatal wine, perhaps because the strength of his youth overcame the strength of the poison, or maybe, as some writers claim, because when he reached his own room he had swallowed an antidote known only to himself, was not so prostrated as to lose sight for a moment of the terrible position he was in. He summoned his faithful Micheletto, together with those among his servants he could rely on, and disposed them in the various rooms that led to his own, ordering the chief never to leave the foot of his bed, but to sleep lying on a rug, his hand upon the handle of the sword. The treatment had been the same for Caesar as for the Pope, but in addition to bleeding and emetics, novel baths were added, which Caesar himself had demanded, having heard that in a similar case they had once restored Ladisius, king of Naples. 4 posts, strongly welded to the floor and ceiling, were set up in his room, like the arrangements at which farriers shoe horses. Every day a bull was brought in, turned over on his back, and tied by his 4 legs to the 4 posts. Then a cut was made, which the intestines were drawn out. Then Caesar slipped into this living bath of blood. When the bull was dead, Caesar was taken out and rolled up in hot blankets, where after copious perspirations he felt some relief. That's disgusting. Every 2 hours, Caesar sent to ask news of his father. He hardly waited to hear that he was dead before, though still at death's door himself, he summoned up all the force of character and presence of mind that naturally belonged to him, and ordered Micheletto to shut the doors of the Vatican before the news of Alexander's decease could spread about the city, and forbade everybody to enter the Pope's rooms until after the money and papers had been removed. Micheletto at once found Cardinal Casanova, held a dagger at his throat, and made him deliver up the keys. Then he took away 2 chests of gold, several boxes of jewels, silver, and costly vases. These were carried to Caesar's apartments. The guards were then doubled, the doors of the Vatican thrown open, and the death of the Pope proclaimed. Although the news was expected, it produced none the less a tragic effect upon Rome, for although Caesar was still alive, his condition left all in suspense. Had the Duke of Romagna, the powerful general who had taken 30 towns and 15 fortresses in 5 years, been seated, sword in hand, upon his charger, all might have been well, as it was as Caesar afterwards told Machiavelli, his ambitious soul had provided for all things that could occur on the day of the Pope's death, except the one that he should be dying himself. Helpless on his bed, sweating off the effects that his own poison had wrought. So, though he retained the power to think, he could not act, but must needs wait and suffer the course of events, instead of confronting and controlling them. Thus, he was forced to regulate his actions, no longer by his own plans, but according to circumstances. His most bitter enemies, who could press him hardest, were the Orsini and the Colonnas. From the one family he had taken their blood, from the other their possessions. So Caesar addressed himself to those to whom he could return what he had taken, and opened negotiations with the colonists. Meanwhile, the obscues of the Pope were going ahead. The Vice-Chancellor had sent out orders to the highest among the clergy not to fail to appear according to custom, on pain of being despoiled of their office and dignities to be present at the Pope's funeral. Each therefore appeared at the hour appointed at the Pontifical Palace, whence the body was to be conveyed to the Church of St. Peter and there buried. The corpse was found to be abandoned and alone in a mortuary chamber, for everyone of the name of Borgia, except Caesar, lay hidden, not knowing what might come to pass, and well they might, for Fabio Orsini, meeting one member of the Borgias, stabbed him, and as a token of his hatred, bathed his mouth and hands in the blood. The agitation in Rome was so great that when the body of Pope Alexander VI was about to be brought into the church, there occurred a panic, such as suddenly arises in times of popular excitement, causing so great a disturbance in the funeral cortege that the guards drew up in battle array, the clergy fled into the sacristy, and the bearers dropped the bier. The people, tearing off the pall, disclosed the corpse, and everyone could gaze with impunity upon the one who, 15 days before, had made princes and kings tremble. Towards 7 o'clock in the evening, when the declining day adds so deep a melancholy to the silence of a church, 4 porters and 2 carpenters carried the body into the chapel, where it was to be interred, and lifting it off the cartalogue, where it lay in state, brought it to the coffin, which was to be its last abode. But it was found that the coffin was too short, and the body could not be got in till the legs were bent and pushed in with heavy blows. Then the carpenters put on the lid, and while one of them sat on the top to force the knees to bend, the other hammered down the nails amid those Shakespearean pleasantries that sound as the last orisons of the ears of the haughty of earth. Then, says Tommaso Tommasi, who was placed on the right of the great altar of St. Peter's. The next morning, this epitaph was found inscribed upon the tomb: Vendit Alexander claves altera Christum, emerit il prius vendere juri post, which being translated reads, Pope Alexander sold the Christ, the altars, and the keys. But anyone who buys a thing may sell it if he please. Caesar Borgia recovered his health, but from the time of his father's death his fortunes changed. He was thrown into prison, from which he managed to make his escape, only to meet the fate in store for him. On this, history narrates. Halfway between the prison and the village, 2 men and a led horse were waiting for him. The 2 men were Micheletto and the Count of Benevento. Caesar sprang upon the riderless horse, pressed with fervor the hand of the Count and the Sbirro. Then all 3 galloped to the frontier of Navarre, where they arrived 3 days later, and were received by the king, Jean Albert, brother of Caesar's wife. From Navarre, Caesar thought to pass into France, and from France to make an attempt upon Italy with the aid of Louis XII. Faith with Caesar's detention in prison Louis had made peace with the King of Spain, and when he heard of Caesar's flight, instead of helping him, as there was some reason to expect he would, since he was a relative by marriage, he took away from Caesar the duchy of Valentinos, together with his pension. Still, Caesar had nearly 200,000 ducats in charge of the bankers of Genoa. He wrote asking for this money, with which he hoped to levy troops in Spain and Navarre, and make an attack upon Pisa. The bankers denied the deposit. Caesar was at the mercy of his brother-in-law. One of the vassals of the king of Navarre, named Prince Alarino, had just then revolted. Caesar was then given command of the army which his brother-in-law, the king of Navarre, was sending out against the prince. With Caesar was Micheletto, who was as faithful and in adversity as ever before. Pardon me. Thanks to Caesar's courage and tactics, Prince Alarino was beaten in a first encounter. But the day after his defeat, he rallied his army and offered battle about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Caesar accepted it. For nearly 4 hours they fought, obstinately on both sides. But at length, as the day was closing, Caesar proposed to decide the issue by making a charge himself, at the head of 100 men-at-arms, upon a body of cavalry which constituted his adversary's chief force. To the great astonishment, this cavalry gave way at the first shock, and took flight in the direction of a forest. Caesar followed close on their heels up to the edge of the forest. Then suddenly the pursued turned. 300 or 400 archers rushed forth from the woods, and Caesar's men, realizing they had fallen into an ambush, fled. Caesar alone remained. He would not retreat an inch. Perhaps he had had enough of life. Anyway, he fought alone like a tiger at bay. But fast riddled with arrows and bolts, his horse fell. With Caesar underneath him, his adversaries rushed upon him, and one thrust an iron pike through his armor and pierced his breast. Caesar cursed God and died. Thus fell, on the 10th of March, 1507, on an unknown field near an obscure village called Vienne, in a skirmish with a vassal of a petty king, the man whom Machiavelli presents to all princes and rulers as the model of ability, diplomacy, and courage. The army of Prince Alarino was finally defeated, thanks to the courage of Micheletto, but who learned, on returning to the camp that night, that Caesar had not returned. Then, only too certain, knowing his master's character, he wished to give one last proof of his devotion by not leaving the body to the wolves and birds of prey. Torches were lighted, and with a guard he went to seek his master. He found 5 men dead on the field. 4 of them were dressed, but the 5th had been stripped and lay completely naked. Micheletto dismounted, lifted the head upon his knees, and by the light of a torch recognized Caesar Borgia. As to Lucrezia, the Duchess of Ferrara, she died full of years and honors, adored as a queen, and sung as a goddess by Ariosto and Bembo. Epilogue. There was once in Paris, says Boccaccio, a brave and good merchant named Jean de Sivigny, who did a great trade in drapery, and who was connected in business with a neighbor and fellow merchant, a very rich Jew named Abraham, who enjoyed a good reputation. Jean de Sivigny, appreciating the qualities of the worthy Israelite, feared lest, good man as he was, his false religion would bring his soul to eternal perdition. So he began to urge him as a friend to renounce his errors and open his eyes to the Christian faith, which he could see for himself was prospering and spreading day by day, being the only true and good religion, whereas his own creed, it was very plain, was rapidly diminishing and would, Oops. It's another half-cut page. It would soon disappear. The Jew replied that, except in his own religion, there was no salvation, that he was born in it, and that he knew nothing in the world that could change his faith. Still, Jean would not admit himself beaten, and never a day passed but he had demonstrated with those fair words the merchant uses to entice the customer the superiority of the Christian religion over the Jewish, and although Abraham was a master of the Mosaic law, he began to enjoy his friend's preaching, either on account of the esteem he felt for him, or because the Holy Ghost had descended upon the tongue of the ardent apostle. Still, obstinate in his own belief, he would not change. But the more he persisted in his obstinacy, the more determined was Jean to convert him. So that at last, being somewhat shaken by his friend's earnestness, Abraham said one day, "Listen, Jean, since you have it so much at heart that I should be converted to your religion, behold me disposed to satisfy you. But before I comply, I must go to Rome to see him, whom you call God's vicar on earth. I must learn his manner of life and morals, as well as those of his brethren and cardinals. And if, as I doubt not, they are in harmony with what you preach, I will admit that your faith is better than mine, and I will do as you desire. But if it should prove otherwise, I shall remain a Jew, for it is not worth while at my age to change my belief for a worse one." Jean was very sad when he heard these words, and he said mournfully to himself, "Now I have lost my time and pains, which I had thought I had spent so profitably to convert Abraham. For if he unfortunately goes to the court of Rome, and he says he will, and there sees the shameful life led by the servants of the church, instead of becoming a Christian, the Jew will be more of a Jew than ever." Then turning to Abraham, he said, "Ah, friend, why do you wish to incur such fatigue and expense by going to Rome? Besides, the fact that traveling by sea or by land must be very dangerous for so rich a man as you are. Do you suppose that there is no one here to baptize you? If you have any doubts concerning the faith I have expounded, where better than here will you find theologians capable of allaying them? So you see, this journey seems to me quite unnecessary. Just imagine that the priests there are such as you see here, and all the holier in that they are nearer to the Holy Father. If you are guided by my advice, you will postpone this wearisome journey till you have committed some grave sin and need absolution. Then you and I will go together." But Abraham replied, "I believe, dear Jean, that everything is as you tell me, but you know how obstinate I am. I will go to Rome, or I will never be a Christian." Then Jean realized that it was useless to try to thwart him, and wished him good luck. But in his heart he gave up all hope, for he felt certain that his friend would come back from Rome more of a Jew than ever, if the papal court was still as he himself had once seen it. So Abraham mounted his horse, and at his best speed took the road to Rome, where upon his arrival he was warmly received by his co-religionists. After staying for some time, he began to study the actions of the Pope, the cardinals, and other prelates, and in the entire papal court. Much to his surprise, he found out, partly by what passed under his own eyes, and partly by what he was told by others, that all, from the Pope down to the lowest sacristan of St. Peter's, were living the most abandoned and luxurious lives, in a most disgraceful and unbridled manner, with no apparent remorse or shame, so that attractive women and handsome youths obtained any favors they desired, in addition to the sensuality they exhibited, even in public. He found that they were gluttonous and drunkards, more slaves of the belly than the greatest of brutes. When he looked further, he found them so avaricious that they sold for cash human bodies and divine offices. Seeing all this together with much more that cannot be told, it appeared to the Jew himself, a chaste, sober, and upright man, that he had seen enough. Therefore he returned to his home. Jean de Chevangy held a fete in honor of Abraham's return, although he had no hope of his coming back converted. But he waited for him to become more settled before he approached the subject on his mind. "So, When after a few days' rest, Abraham came to see his friend, Jean ventured to inquire of him what he thought of the Holy Father, the cardinals, and other dignitaries at the papal court. At these words the Jew explained, God damn them all! I never once succeeded in finding among them any sanctity, any good works, but on the contrary, riotous living, greed, fraud, envy, pride, and even worse. All the machinery seemed to be run by an impulse more diabolical than divine. After all I saw, it is my firm conviction that your Pope and all the others connected with it are using their arts and endeavors to banish the Christian religion from the face of the earth, though they should be its foundation and support. And since, in spite of all the efforts they expend to arrive at this end, I see that your religion is spreading every day, it is manifest to me that the Holy Ghost himself protects it as the true religion. Therefore, deaf as you found me to your counsel and rebellious to your wish, I am now, since I returned from the Sodom, resolved to become a Christian. So let us go at once to the church, for I am ready to be baptized. There is no need to state that Jean de Sivangy was pleased at this avow. Without delay, they went to Notre Dame de Paris, where Jean prayed for the first priest he met to baptize his friend. This done, Abraham changed his Jewish name to the Christian one of Jean, and ever after his natural good qualities greatly increased, and after leading a most exemplary life, he died as a saint. This tale of Boccaccico's gives so admirable an answer to the charge of irreligion which some might make against us if they mistook our intentions as they read the story of the Borgias, that, as we shall not offer any other reply, we have presented it in full to our readers. And let us not forget that let us not forget that if the papacy has had an Innocent the Eighth and an Alexander the Sixth, who are its shame, it has also had a Pius the Seventh, and a Gregory the 16th, who are its honor and glory. Okay, turn the page, come on. All right, there we go. Crimes of the Borgias, Caesar Borgia, Paul Valéry. Against a dark ground which hides a hall so fair, where busts of Horace and Tribulus are, whose distant profiles dream in marble white. Left hand on poniard, at his side, his right. Montecchios, by a smile made less severe, Duke Caesar in his sumptuous dress stands clear. Black eyes, black hair, black velvet's somber gloom, contrast amid the evening's golden bloom, with the rich, heavy pallor of the face, seen 3 parts full, as painters used to place, with Spaniards no less than Venetians, the heads of monarchs and partisans. The nose expands, fine straight, mouth small and red, and yet the hangings moved, one would have said, from the fierce breath that from those lips must go, and the wondering looks he now doth throw, always before him, thus old paintings wrought. Nonchalant of adventures, shows vast thought. The forehead large and clear, with one deep line, swells doubtless with some limitless design, and neath the cap with tremulous plume doth brood, while the plume's ruby clasp sheds rays of blood. That is the end of Little Blue Book number 66, Crimes of the Borgias, written by Alexander Dumas and edited by H.M. Tichenor. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next Little Blue Book.